Okay, in this video, what we're going to be doing is setting up the door to have some multiplayer functionality. Now, due to the nature of what I'm going to be trying to explain, and what I mentioned in a couple videos back, is we're using this as a chance to explain ownership. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make a multicast function on the door that will send a multicast to open/close the door. And that's going to pretty much be what controls it. And then once we get that set up, I will show you why and both why it works on in some occasions and why it doesn't work in another occasion. Because this is only going to actually work on the server. When the client does it, the multicast isn't going to fire. It'll only fire if the server does it. So let's begin. In our door.h, if you recall from the previous videos, which I hope you did, the only way we can call a multicast event or RPC is from the server. So in order to go call a multicast RPC from the client, we have to go from the client to the server, and then the server calls the multicast. So we're going to create that server RPC first. So in our protected section, we're going to do a U function, be server, reliable, with validation. Then we're going to do void server underscore toggle door. And we're going to do bool. Just going to copy it to save time. Server underscore toggle door underscore validate. Then void server underscore toggle door underscore implementation. Let's go ahead and create the implementation for both these functions, like so. And for our validate, we're just going to return true. Now we need to set up the multicast. So I'm going to copy all this again, and we're going to change server to net multicast. Then in these function names, we're going to change server to multi. So we have multi underscore toggle door, and then create those implementations as well, and return true on the validate function again. So now we have our server RPC and our multicast RPC. So what we're going to do is from the server, we're going to call our multicast. So multi toggle door. Here I'm going to go ahead and start printing out some logs. So UE log temp, warning, text, and print out the name of the function. Do the same thing for the server. So it prints out server underscore toggle door implementation. And then we need to set it up in our toggle door. So what we're going to do is if as authority, we're simply going to call multi-toggle door. So multi-toggle door. Otherwise, we're going to call server toggle door because we're on the client. So from the server, from the client. And we're just going to paste all this in the multicast function. So all the door opening and closing logic. Alrighty. Yep, we're calling all that kind of stuff. So next up, what we need to do is replicate our bDoorOpen variable. Because when a player tries to interact with the door and this multicast function fires, well, if they don't know what the bDoorOpen value is, it could be the opposite of, whoever's opening and closing the door. So if they open the door and, it's not the same value, you might see the door close, but they might see the door open. So we need to replicate this as our control. So to do that, we need our get lifetime replicated props that we did in our character class. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in our door.cpp right below begin play and change a beginner multiplayer character to a door. And we're going to replace this line here with, well, first off, we need to include the Unreal Network real quick. So include net Unreal Network. Now we can do the same thing. Do rep lifetime. Now the class, so a door, and the variable, which is b door open. Now we just need to set this to replicate. So where we define the variable, we're going to do uProperty and set it to replicated. And that's all. So now the server is going to be calling toggle door, and the server is going to have authority over the value. So to some extent, this is going to just be kind of triggering opening and closing of the door. But, well, see here in a bit. This isn't exactly a very good way to have this set up, by the way, because one, the still the variable can be out of sync, and two, we only really want the server to change it. So that's where I kind of made my mistake here. So we're going to change it on the server. So I'm going to copy this, move it into our server toggle door implementation. And same thing in our toggle door function, we're going to alter it here too. So that way it gets altered on the server or the actual multicast gets called. Now there's still going to be some delays and all that kind of stuff. So obviously it's not the greatest, and as well as we're going to have a failure. And I'll explain why here in a bit. So here I am on the server. Let me make the client look at the door. Server walks up, tries to open the door, and I just realized I forgot to do something. Let's go ahead and open our door blueprint. You can do this in C++ too, but it's just a little quicker. We need to set it to replicate. That's what I forgot to do. So our door is now replicating. Now if we play again, and the server opens the door, as you can see, they're kind of out of sync, but the door is opening and closing. Now the problem. Let's try to do that same thing on the client. Client does it, nothing happens. And if we look at the log, no owning connection for actor BP underscore door underscore 2. Function server underscore toggle door will not be processed. Now that is because the client that tried to call the server RPC does not have ownership of this door. The server does. So because the server has ownership out of all placed actors, so if I place another one and another one, the server has authority over all three of these. So the only way we can call RPCs is if we have authority over the object. So that's what we have to try to figure out a solution to. So one thing we could do, this has to be performed on the server, is whenever we perform our line trace and we hit the, what do you call it? We hit this guy, we have to figure out some way on the server to tell, well, what do you call it? Set the ownership, or whenever we walk into the door, for example, near it, we set the ownership of the door to the player that's, just walked into it. But obviously that's not a good way. Instead, what we need to do is on our client, when we interact, we need to go from the client to the server to interact with this door that we do not have ownership of. So obviously if we set it up so, like I said before, if the client walks near the door, then the ownership gets transferred to the client. That is not a good way at all. And that's something we honestly just want to avoid. One, it's inefficient. Two, it's honestly impractical to program. Not necessarily, but, and three, we have the issue of what if player one walks into the door and then player two walks into it the second time? Well, player two can't interact with the door. Player one can't interact with the door anymore, but player two can because he was the last one to walk to the door. So what we need to do is go from the client to the server with our interact function. So what we can do here, we're also going to do just a very simple little cheat check to kind of show you what we didn't do in our onFire functions. I'm going to go ahead and just minimize these to get them out of the way as well. because we're focusing on our interact section. So what we're going to do is first off create that server RPC to go from the client to the server. So what we're going to do is function server reliable and with validation. Then we're going to do void server underscore interact. And in this case, I just wanted to actually take in a pointer to the actor that we're trying to interact with. So in my case, it's class a door. So that's the door we want to interact with. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to create a validate. So bool server underscore interact underscore validate. Then our implementation. So void server underscore interact underscore implementation. Let's create the implementation for our validate and our implementation function. And for validate, we're just going to return true. Now what we want to do is we want to check and make sure in our server function if door is valid. So if door, and that's all. So if door is valid, we want to call toggle, I messed up, door, toggle, door. So we're going to call this on the server. So now in our interact function, that's where we're going to perform our authority check. So we're still going to cast the door, but instead what we're going to do is if has authority, we're going to do door, toggle door. If we do not have authority, we're going to do server underscore interact, and we're going to pass in door. So if we're on the server, we're going to just call toggle door directly. If we are not on the server, we're going to call the server RPC to go from the client to the server. And then now that we're on the server, then we call toggle door. So now if I compile, we can go ahead and test this out. A quick little rundown. Now that we're only calling this from the server, this is going to be the only thing that runs. This should never be hit at all. So let's test it out. Okay. So let's try it from the client. Now when the client does it, look at that. It's calling the multi-toggle door function. They're still out of sync and everything, but that's okay because it still gets the point across. Sorry, I was just having kind of fun. But it still gets the point across. You just have the issue of it being out of sync. So let's take a look at some way we can deal with that. So for starters, let's go ahead and get rid of all this server functionality, well, RPC functionality. So we're going to remove our else statement and our multicast and our server RPCs because those are no longer needed. Well, for the example. So now let's remove toggle door. Oh, wait, I have one mistake. We're going to copy first where we play all the animations, then we delete it. So we're going to replace where it says multi-toggle door with the code that plays our animations, and then we're going to change this variable after the animation plays. So now I'm going to compile. And I'm sorry, I just realized something stupid that I just did again. We want the multicast function to be there. We don't want the server RPC to be there. That was my fault. So just Control Z a little bit and only delete the server RPC. Leave the multicast. Okay, so now everything's the same. However, the reason for the door being out of sync between clients, so for example, the client opens the door, it opens and kind of triggers weirdly on the server, is because we're doing the same thing that we did before, where we set B door open to equal the opposite instead, well, we set it to equal the opposite of the variable before we play the animation. So it's changing the variable So if the door is closed, I mean, if the door is closed, like this is false, like we have it set to in our constructor, this is what is supposed to run. So if door is false and our open animation is valid, we know that the door is false, so we want to go ahead and play the open animation for the door. Well, because we're changing door from false to true and then calling this function, this is going to run and play the close animation even though the door is already closed. So after our multicast function on the server, only then do we want to change this value. And this should allow it to stay, for the most part, somewhat reliably in sync. There's still that chance for it to come out of sync, but that will fix itself when the door gets used again. So it's not too big of a deal. Well, it would be for gameplay purposes, but you know what I mean. So now when I open the door, it'll work like so. It opens and closes in sync with the client. And when the server does it, it's the same thing. It is in sync. And you can walk through it, do everything just like normal. Whoops. So now we have everything set up for the door with a multicast function. So that way it's replicated among everybody. So now testing with 3 clients, just to, I guess, kind of drive the point home. Voila, it works. So now we're done with the multicast. And I kind of want to explain an issue with this. So to explain that issue, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this project up as a listen server. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 2 clients connect to it. And I will show you what I mean here in a second. So let's see. We're going to create a shortcut. What were the... Let me check real quick. Trying to remember what it was for the parameters. Okay, do I not have? No, I did not. So I did it in this one then. Yes. Okay, so so it's the ending portion. So what I'm going to do, you don't really have to do this, but actually, screw it, I'm just going to copy and paste this. Inner multiplayer server. I want to open this in Notepad, launch using, I'm using a different engine version than normal, change it from war to war to beginner multiplayer and beginner multiplayer.u project. That is not the map we want. Map we want is first person CPP maps. I'm going to copy the reference. It's going to be first person example map, like so. We started as a listen server. Everything else should hopefully work. I want to give that a quick test, make sure it launches the server. And hopefully it does it to the right map, which it does. That is great. Now I just got to minimize, and we're going to do the same thing for the client. So that way we can have clients automatically connect to it. Again, you don't have to do this. I'm just doing this for example. So change the engine version to the normal. The thing to burning land or beginner multiplayer, and then everything else should it's not connecting right up. We have to do no, instead of the map, do what was it? Okay, so we pass in our 127.0.0.1. And now we should be able to, whoops, please don't open. I think you're going to open. Here it is. So here we should have one client connecting automatically, which we do. All right, let's make sure he's right in front of our other guy, our server, which it is. So now for the example. Here's why a multicast is a bad idea in this case. So currently the only two players or actors that the door is relevant to is this client and this server. So if I open it on this client, because it's relevant, the client's going to see the door open, and so is the server. So now I'm going to show you the problem with the multicast. Let me minimize and load up with another client. So another client is now connecting, and we're going to see the door being closed. As you can see, the door is closed on this client, but I can walk right through it. That's due to relevancy. So if I walk this way, I'm running into something. That's because the door is open here. The door itself is actually open, but for this client, it's closed. And he knows the value of the door. So whenever I press E on the door on this client, we're going to see it glitch out a little bit. So it's going to play the closing animation. So what that means, it's going to snap open really fast and play the closing animation like this, like so. But the thing is, now it is in sync with all the clients and the server. However, it just wasn't in sync for that very first, uh, I guess, look at it. So now let's give some reasons as to why that is. And that is due to relevancy. And when you were, okay, let's say we'll use distance as an example. So I have this client here. All right, he's really close to the door. Obviously, the door itself is going to be relevant to this client. Now let's say the client is, insanely far away. Well, he is not going to be relevant. Golly, that's really far. The door probably won't be relevant to him. So let's say it's not relevant to the client that's way over there. When the multicast function runs, it will not be running on his client because it is not relevant. So that's to save a lot of bandwidth. So for example, let's say somebody shoots 8 miles away from you. You don't need to know that that person shot. You don't need to see any animations play. You don't need to hear the bullet. You don't need to know anything about what happened. The only thing you need to possibly know is, okay, maybe he killed someone. So you would see that in the log, but that would be set up in a different manner. So the same thing applies to the door. When Jimmy is 5 miles away from the door, Jimmy doesn't need to see the door open and close or anything like that, so it's not relevant to him. However, even if let's say the door is open, so it's closed right now, let's say Bob opens the door, and then Jimmy walks all the way, all 5 miles, back to right here, so he's really close to the door again. He's now relevant to the door. However, he still sees the door as being closed, even though the door is supposed to be open, because he missed that multicast. He wasn't relevant. Well, the door wasn't relevant to him when the multicast was fired. So the way you fix that is using an OnRep. And the OnRep fires whenever the variable itself changes, so whenever the replication occurs. So with an OnRep, just like we had set up with our shooting, let's say Jimmy's 5 miles again this way over here. Bob opens the door. The door is not relevant for Jimmy, so Jimmy doesn't know that the door was opened. However, when Jimmy comes back, he walks all 5 miles back to the door, so the door is now relevant for him. The door, because it's using OnRep, the variable is going to be replicated to him, and it's going to fire the OnRep event And that OnRep event is going to be what opens and closes the door. So he's going to see the door as open. So it may not have opened the second Bob did it when Jimmy was all the way over here 5 miles away. But as Jimmy got closer and closer to where the door is now relevant to Jimmy, the door is now going to open for Jimmy. And that's why we would use an OnRep in this in this case, instead of a multicast. So you could think of it just like if you're familiar with the game Rust or any multiplayer game, well, Rust would be a good example. You have a humongous map that's randomly generated, players place down objects and all that kind of stuff. Well, you don't need to know every time the door opens or closes for someone across the map. But when you get near it to where you're thinking about doing a raid on that base, you want to know whether or not that door is open or closed. And that's done through a similar manner as our onRep variables. So that's what we're gonna be implementing in the next video. So hopefully that was a good explanation and it made sense. As always, if it doesn't, you can find my link to, you can make a comment or join my Discord server and ask, which I have a dedicated section just for this series. But yeah, hopefully that made sense and cleared some stuff up. So as always, if you like what I'm doing and you want to help support me, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description. And like I just said, you can also find a link to my Discord server below. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Take care.